Hey everybody, it's Decap here, and in this video, I'm diving into all the different ways you can level up in the War Within expansion. I'll break down the data and share insights to each method so you can decide the best way for you to level up. This isn't a step-by-step guide or specific route, it's about giving you tools to choose your own path. Remember, there's no right way to level up, it's all about what works best for you. One last thing before we dive in, it's important to note that as you level up, you'll start receiving slightly less experience per mob kill, per quest completed, and so on. You might also find that enemies take longer to defeat as your gear becomes less effective. The data I'm sharing is primarily from level 70 to 73, so while this gives a solid foundation, all methods of leveling will naturally and eventually become less efficient as you approach level 80. This is going to be the case for every single thing that we talk about here. So let's start with the tried and true method that most people do, especially going through the campaign quests, and that's with questing. So specifically for the data I gathered, it was it was uncontested questing. I wanted to make sure that's very prevalent because there's not a ton of people questing on beta right now. So uncontested quests. This is going to be the best way to level if the quests are uncontested, right? That's a big if. And so doing so, you could easily get about 6% of your level per minute on average, right? Takes you, let's say you go to a quest hub, you do 4 quests, you get about 24, with the killing mobs plus the turn of the quest, you get about 24% of your level. Took you 4 minutes to do it, 6% per level. 6% of your level, per minute that you spent 4 minutes. So that is kind of like how these break down. And even when you do an individual quest, it's still going to take you at these low levels like 1 minute to do uncontested, and then you still get that same experience. So naturally speaking, this is going to be the way. Now we have to talk about reality as well. When you're starting an expansion, unless you play it extremely niche time where other people aren't playing very much on your server or in your region or whatever, you're probably going to be dealing with a lot of competition. So that number is going to drastically be lower, even at the 70 to 73 range, let alone at the 79 range, right? So that number's, you're probably never going to actualize that 6% per minute, 6% of your level per minute number. You'll probably never actually quite get there, but it is worth noting that questing is still, and it pretty much always has been, the most effective way to level, with maybe exception to like some hyper spawns or something like that and having people help you kill mobs. Obviously people have done that in the past as well. But quests are still really, really good. If you can do them without being contested too much, or you're not waiting for spawns too much, or just if you're not getting frustrated and you don't mind waiting, it's still a very, very good way to level up, as it always has been. Next, let's talk about dungeons. So dungeons are also a pretty good way to level up, especially if you're a tank or a healer, right? Because you can queue for a dungeon and get basically like an instant queue for that ring. Now, even at the beginning of an expansion, the DPS queue won't be too long because there'll just be a ton of people queuing up. But tank or healer, it's going to be pretty much instant. And so, especially if you're one of those roles, this becomes a way that you could solo just leveling in dungeons. Solo or dungeon running early on is going to be about 4% of your level per minute, and the dungeon will not take very long, especially if even like one person in your group has decent gear, can pretty much just speed run the dungeon for you. Maybe it's a little bit less fun to do that way, but that definitely is the case in any group that you queue for, is like somebody has gear and the dungeon's going to go pretty darn quickly because of that. Now again, that's not going to be the case as you get higher. So this is a number that you will be able to achieve at these early levels, this 4% of your level per minute. You will be able to achieve this at early levels. I don't know if you can achieve that at a higher level though, like 79. That might go down to 3%, 2%, but it's definitely a tried and true. And also, you're not contested in any way. The only thing that contests you is by queuing as a DPS player, not having instant queues. So dungeons are also something that you could do while you're questing. You could queue for a dungeon while you're questing and things like that. Most people do level with a variety of options, not just one thing. But it's important to know that dungeons are a very, very good source to level still, and they pretty much always have been, especially at the beginning of expansion when it's one way to do things without being contested for mobs, for kills, etc. Next, let's talk about delves. So delves are a new form of content, and they are, they are a kind of like a dungeon basically, except for there's some different rules, and you can do these solo, which can be a little bit better for some people. And also it means if you're a DPS, you don't have to wait for a queue at all. Now they do offer a little bit less experience per minute, about 3% of your level per minute in a delve. And what's also good about the delves is that, again, there's no competition. You just walk into the delve, and then you do the delve, then you leave the delve, and then you can technically do it again. It's not lucrative by any means, but it's extremely consistent. You pretty much know what you have to do. You know how to do it. You're going to get the same XP pretty much every time. There's variations in the delves, of course, and some delves will be a little bit more, a little bit less. But delves are definitely an option. I will throw in here that there is normally a quest to do each delve, and in the starting zone there are 3 delves. So going through and doing a delve with a quest is actually puts it into that higher tier, kind of, with uncontested quests. So it's definitely worth doing the delve at least once with the quest for sure. And it's just something you can also do if you're really annoyed waiting for spawns. You can do some delves. You can do some delves while you queue for dungeons. What's nice about delves is you don't have to queue for them at all, but you do have to actually be there. You have to actually walk into the delve. It's like supposed to be open world. And so what I would say about this, it's very consistent, even if it's not lucrative. It's a very consistent method to do. Next up, we're going to go with one that is definitely very powerful if you can find a hyper spawn, and that's going to be uncontested mob grinding. This, like delves, is going to actually be about 3% per minute if it's uncontested. What I mean by uncontested is a lot of mobs are going to be dead. There's going to be a lot of times where you're waiting for spawns. It's going to be hard to find an area where you can just consistently kill mobs without somebody else coming in and also killing the mobs before you can touch them or get a tag on them. Or, again, you're just waiting for things to spawn. If you were able to find a hyper spawn, this is actually a perfectly good way to level uncontested mob grinding, and it's pretty effective, especially if you can find clumps up groups of mobs. We talked about a quest with like Murlocs. I don't know if they're actually called Murlocs in this, but they're similar to Murlocs, and there's a lot of these things all around. And if you had that area to yourself, all of a sudden mob grinding doesn't seem so terrible anymore if you actually have that at your disposal. However, and I'm sure there's probably some super fast speed level player or whatever that maybe has found a hyper spawn somewhere that maybe people won't be, or something like that, and maybe they can take advantage of that, because it can be very, very effective once that is the case. Because even with questing, right? Even with questing, you complete a quest hub, you have to fly to the next quest hub, right? There is some travel time. There might be a little quest to connect to the quest hub that you have to do first and go talk to somebody. So you have this travel time that you're not going to have with mob grinding. With mob grinding, if you do find a spot that you can do this in, you can just continually do it, running around in a circle doing it, right? Or in some cases, the mobs just like spawn near you and come to you, in past cases at least of this. So it is a very effective strategy. It's, again, just going to be really hard to do at the beginning of an expansion. And if somebody does find a hyper spawn, everyone's going to find out about it, and it will get nerfed. So if you have to have this already planned out pretty much if you're going to plan on doing that. But yeah, it's always good to kill mobs. It is effective to kill mobs. If you see, it's worth killing a pack of mobs as long as you can kill them with relative speed, to get your quest objective as well. Killing mobs is good. It's a plus in your leveling, and most things are good. Everything we're going to talk about here is actually efficient in some way to grab, even if you don't want to fully commit to only doing that. And the last thing we're going to talk about is gathering. So gathering is a way I have actually leveled up before. In Shadowlands, I leveled up a character only mining and herbalizing, and it is a bit slower. It's about 2% per minute, and that is uncontested, right? Uncontested gathering. And how can gathering be contested? Because people can share nodes now. However, it only stays up for a certain amount of time before it despawns. And so a very frustrating thing if you're trying to do this is if you happen to get into a chase, basically, where there's somebody in front of you doing the same thing as you, and you're getting to things right after at the perfect time that they left it, and everything's just kind of despawning. And then you kind of have to either go back to the start and just kind of start your own spawn, or it can just be very frustrating when it's contested. It's likely going to be very highly contested at the beginning of an expansion, and it is already kind of like a lower way to gain experience at only about 2% of your level per minute. And that's if, again, it's completely uncontested and you already kind of know where the mining nodes are or the herbalizing nodes are. I will say you could actually get higher than 2% if you get lucky, like if you're both herbalist and miner and you have a plant right next to a mining node, right? And that happens a few times like that, you can actually bump that number up to like 3% pretty easily if you do get super lucky. But it's going to be closer to that 2% number on average. And then also there's just the travel time. That's really what does it with the gathering. If you could actually just sit and mine without having to travel, if you could do hyper spawn of mining, for example, if you found a node that's hyper spawning, that would be an extremely lucrative way to level, actually. It would be insanely good. What makes gathering slow is the travel time between the things, having to actually herbalize, having to actually mine the node. And there are some nodes, I don't know about the herbalizing nodes, but there's a mining node that actually tries to hit you with dynamite while you mine it in this expansion. So that can slow you down too, because you do have to dodge that. It will kill you if you just keep getting hit by the dynamite. So that's a factor to play in as well. So in conclusion, basically, we talked about 5 types of leveling. We have if we were to rank them in order of whatever of efficiency, it would be uncontested questing, it would be dungeons, it would be delves tied with uncontested mob grinding, and then it would be uncontested gathering. You might look at this, you might say, well, dungeons kind of seem like the way to go because everything is not going to be uncontested when we actually do this. And that would be a reasonable assumption to make. The dungeons are going to be pretty consistent. If you ever have a dungeon quest, it's definitely worth going into the dungeon, especially if you have that instant queue as a tank or healer. Now, if you're queuing as a DPS, just make sure you're doing something else while you're waiting for your queue. Go gather, go just kill mobs, go. You probably don't have time to do a delve in the time that you're waiting for your dungeon to pop, but you can also do some quests or get progress on quests. But dungeons are definitely always a good way to do it, and the more stuff you kill and the better your group is, the better it's going to be. There is a hidden downside with dungeons though, because you might just be like, okay, well, I'm just going to queue for a lot of dungeons, do the main story quests. Maybe that's a very reasonable thing to do, by the way. But there is a downside with dungeons too. You could get a bad group, and I don't mean a bad group just as in bad players. I mean as like toxic. Somebody goes AFK for 20 minutes. Things like that can happen as well. And so there are some downsides. You are relying on other people when you go into a dungeon group. If you have your own group of people, then it's fine to do. If you are obviously, if you are a speed level or whatever, this video isn't really for you. You probably have a strategy or a route that you found. Okay, I can go do this hub of quests, get a quarter of my level, then do this hub of quests, do a quarter of my level, do the delves with quests, get a quarter of my level. You probably already have like a strategy that's using a mixture of all of these, or you found a hyper spawn, etc. Right? And this video is not really for you, but maybe the data still is interesting to you anyways if you are one of those types of people. But this is more a casual way to look at the leveling process, but still understand what exactly you're getting into here. So that's going to be it for this one, guys. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel because it helps me out a lot. If you're already a subscriber, I encourage you to check out the Patreon. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.